What is up, everybody? Welcome to the Week 2 Cash Game Review. I'm your host, TJ Hernandez, the director of DFS at 444, with my co host, Matt Savoca. This is something we're doing every week. This is our second one of the season, same time every week, 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Only going for about 30 minutes, so let's not waste any time. Let's jump right into it. Matt, how was your week 2?
Hey, my week two was better than week one. Yep, there is the FanDuel cash
Nice.
lineup right up on the screen there. Yeah,
Beautiful.
so it went a lot better this week. Now, I didn't have as successful a weekend in my GPP lineups, but 73% ROI in cash, 86% of head to
Beautiful.
heads I took down. So I'm yeah, cannot complain at all. That's why we always recommend in our strategy shows leading up to the season about putting a majority of your bankroll in cash. Because luckily, this week it was all about not overthinking it, especially on
Yeah.
FanDuel, where we talk multiple times about you being able to fit in more star plays. This was a week about just taking obvious opportunity, obvious value that really across the industry that you saw floating to the top of the ownership projections and just taking advantage. Even a couple players underwhelmed, like Justin Herbert, but basically that whole
Mhm.
game kind of underwhelmed. And
Yeah.
still, correctly kind of identifying this as a week where you could play wide receiver in the flex, even on FanDuel, was something that I was definitely proud of hitting on this week. But
Yeah.
it was really about getting to that Sunday morning place where I basically had this lineup set on Saturday night, and I
Hmm.
spent a little bit of time on Sunday morning taking the 1,000 foot view of the slate and then just trying to beat it any way I could. And ultimately, I said, you know what? I really just can't. And obviously, there's some things that didn't go my way. Like Lockett had a bigger game once again for the Seahawks, but obviously taking advantage of that game environment. Diggs being a rock solid play, uh, really for any game environment on the Bills. I can't really complain about how I was looking at this slate from a cash perspective.
Yeah, I love the Diggs call. Is something we talked about late Sunday morning in the DFS GPP last look show on Discord. It just seemed like people weren't really paying up for that spot, but in on FanDuel, obviously, it was something you could do. And obviously, the huge thing people are going to be talking about while they're reviewing this week, or people are going to forget about and just move on to next week as soon as possible, is that Chargers game that we were all expecting the big shootout from, and we were targeting in cash and GPPs very heavily, only combined for 37 points. So
What a
not
tilting
the
game.
yeah.
Touchdowns being called back. I mean,
Yeah, turnovers, a lot of penalties on the Chargers, which really, I mean, the big killer of that game was the penalties. I think if we don't have those drive and touchdown ending penalties, we probably get to where we want to be. But even then, like Tony Pollard scoring right off the bat was like, oh, this is going to be one of those days, isn't it? But let's talk about some of the spots that you did hit on. I want to get to the wide receiver and the flex in a moment, but in general, just a quick overview of the spots that you were on. I mean, obviously you covered them in your article because you played them. But anything that just really stood out to you that you're excited for that you hit on, or just that you going back just was kind of the locks for you.
well, it's always nice when you call someone a smash play
Hmm.
in your article and then they score 32 points, and so that definitely feels good. At the same time, if you look at like optimal lineup percentages, DK Metcalf was showing up more than Tyler Lockett, so we got to remember that there's going to be variance there. The Buccaneers defense as an obvious option really happened. It was one of those moments where I saw the
Hmm.
notification that the Buccaneers defense had scored, and then I saw another one. I was like, "Oh, this must be a mistake. Like this is just the
Yeah,
same.
yeah.
This is the same notification as before." No, you're not going to get two touchdowns in a row from your defense very often, but definitely happy to call out this Atlanta team. Definitely in a period of transition. Not going to say they're going to be this bad forever, but boy, are they exploitable right now. And then focusing my late swap energy on GPPs. Not overthinking it. Some of my head-to-heads were really, really close. There were some of my head-to-heads, especially where they really blew up with some kind of off the wall picks in the first games, but that
Mhm.
let them do some, more chalky things in the second half that I was concerned about, but I ended up spending most of my energy on late swapping GPPs.
Yeah.
Ultimately, I got close. I had a Tampa Bay stack in my single entry, but for cash, just really happy about reading the game scripts correctly here and eating the chalk when it was appropriate.
Yeah, I mean we won't talk about the Tampa Bay touchdown where they got a taunting call for basically turning around, which is a whole another conversation to have. But yeah, basically when you are even when you're this heavy on late games, when Dig scores and your super chalk not Kittle, sorry, Cup goes off, like you're pretty much rolling at that point. If your afternoon guys come even close to expectation, even with DK sitting with 8 points, like everybody would have to completely bust once Cooper gets there by a lot and Dig scores. You're sitting pretty. Let's talk about you didn't miss very much. You had top 20th or top 80th percentile score or something like that based on your standing in the large field double up, but a couple spots that you weren't too excited about. I mean, I think the one that probably stands out looking at this lineup is Kittle. Just talk a little bit about him, and then some other spots where you think you might have been able to improve the lineup, if at all.
Yeah, obviously Kittle disappoints there with under 4 points, and he's disappointed in general so far. You still have to go with guaranteed usage, and
Mhm.
that's the one thing with Kittle that suddenly is coming into question. And I don't know, maybe it's the San Francisco offense sort of like missing an identity. Maybe this is speculation. Maybe we even see them move to Trey Lance if this sort of doesn't get sorted out. But Kittle is not a safe play, especially for
Sure.
cash lineups, as we thought a couple weeks ago. I think we're going to talk a little bit later about not overweighting the results we've seen so far and making sure that we have the past still included, contextualized into our projections going forward. But yeah, I think the usage for a player like Darren Waller is really, really different at this point. And even Kyle Pitts is starting to creep up there. Not to mention the fact that apparently Rob Gronkowski scores 2 touchdowns every week now. So we're all fish for not playing him.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have some more to say about that. This is the kind of problem you're going to run into on FanDuel, and I wouldn't even say it's a problem. I don't think playing Kittle here is a huge error. My only thought is like if I'm trying to pay up for tight end, I might figure out try a little harder to get Waller, but obviously your lineup works out really well. You're not going to run into a spot on FanDuel in a week like this where trying to pay down at tight end anyway, just because you can fit so many of these really popular plays in and very good plays in. Like the only reason is maybe if you're trying to force a CMC or something like that, or a Kyler, but I just don't think that it was a situation where you needed to do that. So even though the point total didn't play out like we hoped for with Kittle, the overall build is what we're looking at, right? It doesn't make sense to go all the way down on FanDuel on a week like this. Obviously, on DraftKings, we'll have a very different discussion about
Yes.
tight end specifically and just what we were trying to accomplish. But from a zoomed out view, it doesn't even have to be this lineup or cash specific. What is something on the week that you would have liked to change a little bit, or that you just maybe flew under the radar for you in your process?
Yeah, I mean, obviously DK Metcalf's in my cash lineup, so I knew that it was a good game environment, but my exposure overall to Tennessee, Seattle was either incorrect or not enough,
Mm-hmm.
insufficient, I should
Yeah.
say. And, again, one of the things I really like to do is Sunday morning, wake up really early, take a moment, pretend I've sort of never seen the slate before,
Yeah.
and try to take out those preconceived notions. And one of the things that really came to the front of my mind is that one of these big four running backs was about to go off. And of
Yeah.
course, it was sort of a perfect storm where Christian McCaffrey had a score that didn't kill you, especially because of his high salary. Dalvin Cook looked good, but got hurt, disappointed. Kamara was terrible, but Derrick
Mm.
Henry absolutely blew up the slate.
Yeah.
And the only thing that we can say is different about Derrick Henry this year than previous years is that 6 targets is nothing to scoff at. And
Right.
two of his highest target total games in his career have been these first 2 games of the season. So if he's going to have reception upside,
Yeah. It's
we got to just play him more. The bottom
yeah.
line.
Yeah. I mean, the way they use him, like 5 targets for him is like the upside of 9 targets for almost any other running back, basically. Like he just does so much already on the ground that, and we've seen him like he's not a negative in the pass game. They don't use him a lot, and he's not going to be running like perfect wheel routes or perfect option routes or anything. But we've seen him, some of his long plays come on these little swing passes. Like it's just Derrick Henry. Once he gets going, it's really hard to tackle him. So it doesn't matter if you're handing off and he's getting the edge, or if it is just on a pass, it's just an extended handoff.
And I should add, that's not something TJ is just saying off the cuff, that once Derrick Henry gets going, it's tough to stop him. This is something that PFF actually did a study on, and Henry is anomalous in the fact that when you give him more carries, and it's literally a force equals mass times acceleration thing. It's tough to tackle that many pounds at that size, that fast, that over the course of a game. And so, if he's going to be,
I was just like cue. I was gonna say cue the Josh Norman stiff arm gif, right? What did you see outside of your lineup? Again, a fantastic lineup. But what did you see that worked in other winning lineups? Either that you liked, didn't like, just you found at the top of FanDuel lineups this week.
Eating the chalk really was the option this week. Not overthinking it, as we said in the beginning, was really helpful. And getting to Tampa Bay stacks, where we knew that there were these great game environments in the afternoon. The highest total games were all over the place, but the easiest team to bet on was the Atlanta Falcons defense being horrible. And Tom Brady, of course, took advantage. I was able to get exposure to it through the Bucs defense. It worked out better than expected, but ultimately it was these Tampa Bay stacks that destroyed everyone if they had Derrick Henry as well.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't talk about it, you and I, on any of our shows because we're not touching on GPPs, but it's something that Jordan and I talked about on Sunday morning in the GPP show. It was a week where we should be eating the chalk. We didn't have to be super contrarian. Obviously, if you were loading up on Chargers and Cowboys and the running backs, then you're going to have to be contrarian somewhere. But there was nobody that we were expecting to be. Obviously, if we saw the ownership in your lineups, that's a cash game. But in tournaments, we didn't expect anybody to be like over 25%. So those are the weeks where we want to eat the chalk, right? Like if everybody's 20, 22, 17, 18, 19%, you're not like losing a lot to the field. You're still going to have like unique combinations. So these are the weeks that we want to eat the chalk. But really good stuff on FanDuel this week. Let's move on over to DraftKings, where at first it's going to look really bad, but then I'm going to show you why actually I was excited about this week. So I'll just jump into it. Only won a little over 20% of my head-to-heads this week in tournaments. I did have fair exposure to Derrick Henry, which I talked about on the Yahoo show a lot with Matt Harmon. We talked about a lot on Sunday morning in the GPP. So the overall slate wasn't a complete disaster, but one of my worst showings in cash games. And I mean, I didn't really have too many hits to talk about here. The hits were basically what we were expecting. Chris Carson and Najee Harris. Herbert put up 20 DK points. Nothing that's super exciting about. Jamar gets there on a late long touchdown. Wasn't really doing much before that. I think Cole Beasley is fine. He 4 for 36 isn't good, but it's just like for a $4,600 receiver when you're trying to do other stuff. That's kind of, you're hoping for that floor. I'm going to say that playing Justin Herbert, even though I whiffed on Amari Cooper, playing Justin Herbert and targeting that game in cash games, I think is still the right process. We already talked about a couple of touchdowns being a penalty, and it did play out as we expected. Even though Amari only had 3 for 24, the game was super concentrated in terms of its touches. Now, I know Tony Pollard and Zeke had more to say about it than they did in week 1, but we expected that to an extent. But Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, all pretty concentrated target and touch shares as we expected. Obviously, if you were going to have Dallas here, you wanted CeeDee instead of Amari. But I mean, those are just kind of the breaks when you're targeting wide receivers. Going on, go ahead.
I wanted to say, what a perfect embodiment of the difference in the decisions you need to make in FanDuel versus DraftKings, because our thought processes are going into how to attack a cash game lineup are extremely similar, and you can see them in our lineup choices. But, part of this is just variance.
Yeah.
But the other part of it is you have to make different salary-based concessions, particularly at low salary options for DraftKings. And that's why you can't play studs in every part of your lineup like you can to an extent on FanDuel when the pricing is a little bit softer.
Yeah, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit when we talk about kind of our broad overview and what we would have changed. So I'm not going to include the lineup construction in my misses. I think I did whiff on it, but I think I whiffed on it because I kind of alligator armed it. But I mean, my misses were pretty obvious. I didn't play Cup, which I'm still torn if that is the as egregious as it looks with his scoring or not. I mean, the fact him going off and scoring twice, I mean, we can't ever expect that. And the target share did converge between him and Robert Woods. He only had 2 more targets than Robert Woods. It was Higbee that fell off, which I wasn't too surprised by. Actually, in my cash game write-up, I wrote that if you're going to be in that salary range for tight ends, it's Fant's going to give you the floor. Higbee is a scoring upside, and he is going to be susceptible to swings because we do expect Woods to bounce back. So on the whole, it does look pretty bad that I didn't play Cup. I'm still not sure if it's completely egregious, but not stacking the Chargers. Like I think I got a little too conservative there and thinking if I have Herbert, I don't need to play either of his receivers just because of the way I was building. Get Amari or CD on the other side, and then hopefully have enough there. In retrospect, I think that's probably my biggest error and probably leads to just a better roster construction. If I do, if I'm playing Justin Herbert and I'm playing full PPR sites, they're in a spot like that where we're expecting 55 or 37. I should be playing Keenan Allen with him there. I want to get on some lineup building stuff again in a little bit. But the reason I said I didn't hate this week is because the process I did get right is the late swap and what I think a lot of people miss out on and where you lose a lot of opportunity. So I said I won just over 25% of my head-to-heads. And really it should have been a bottom 5% week. It turned into a bottom 22, 23% week, which does matter. It doesn't feel like it in the moment, but if you can salvage uptick in 15 to 20% return, that's real money that you're not losing. And basically my process was I have a ton of head-to-heads. I have 1 or 2 big 50-50s or double-ups that I put my lineup in, and I had a very bad morning to start to start in cash. Kamara just doesn't get there. Steelers defense is bad, and I have to start making a lot of swaps because there's just a lot of spots where I can't win. So what I did, and in retrospect, obviously a full-on late swap here with everybody would have been good because Derrick Henry and Kyler Murray go off. But the thought process is I go through all my head-to-heads. I don't have time to match up every single lineup and see who's going to overlap me. So the quick and dirty fix is I look at all my head-to-heads and say, am I winning or am I losing? And if I'm losing or tied, do we have pretty much the same PMR or am I trailing in PMR? Because in all those situations, most likely with the combinations that I had, who were the Herbert, the Amari combos, I'm not going to catch, and Chris Carson, I'm not going to catch most of the field. The only way I'm doing it is if I just go like crazy here. Kyler Murray, Derrick Henry is who I cared about. Derrick Henry is one of my favorite contrarian plays of the week. So in all my late swaps in cash, I need to get to Derrick Henry while I'm trailing. That's why you see Jalen Guyton there, because he makes Kyler Murray and Derrick Henry fit. And then Guyton's in a high-scoring game. If he scores, it's just that much more. So I switch him into my head-to-heads. I switch him in on my 3X, 10X, and my winner-take-all tournaments that I put my cash lineups in. And I think that's probably the right thing to do, even though I would have won a lot more. And I actually want to hear your opinion on this. Even though I would have won a lot more if I switched to Kyler and Derrick Henry, the reason that I didn't is because I'm looking at my 50-50 lineup. And when Jamar scores late, it puts me pretty close to the cash line. So even though I'm going to have a lot of overlap, when Jamar scores late and I'm pretty close to the double up cash line, the thought process here is, well, if Amari and Chris Carson and Justin Herbert go off like we expect them to, even though again, they're going to be owned, I'm close enough to the cash line where they have enough float potential where I will maintain my wins, jump into that 50-50 cash line, and then my losses here should turn into wins if this happens. What's your thought process there? Because I think what happened was Tampa Bay hits right away. Derrick Henry starts scoring a little bit. Some people have him, and then there's just other random plays that people have in cash. Arizona and Minnesota that aren't popular, but do move the line a little bit. And it just goes bad.
Yeah.
The afternoon game just goes bad. It just is what it is. But I think the process is pretty close to right.
Yeah, and I hate to say that it's week to week specific, but I think this was so unique because we had so many high total games in the afternoon, creating so many opportunistic pivots at every salary point that the opportunity to late swap uniquely presented itself in a way that it doesn't always happen that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I hate to say that this really comes down to individual player evaluation from a week to week and the projections that we have available to us. But I do think that's a part of it here where we've both mentioned our late swap strategies as one of the most important things about this week. That's not always the case. It's always important, but in a week like this where there's so many high total games, so many high total options, we have to spend our energy somewhere. And I do think that your process for where to spend your energy in that final hour before the afternoon games was sound. As I said, I had to sort of leave my cash games alone, even though some of them, I got to say this, I forget the specifics, but some wild cash game lineups that you see out there that happen to go off in the early games where I sort of had to put that aside and focus on my GPP strategy, and that worked for me this week. But really, what we need is to just spend that time wisely, and I think you definitely did it here.
Yeah, and I will say for people that are just wondering about how to approach this late swap and whatnot, again, remember what I said is I have a lot of players in a game that's supposed to really blow up, and enough of them where if it's just one or two players, I can go through and really get granular on the late swap. And my score was still okay after that Jamar score. If I'm just getting smoked in the early games, I have a lot of early games, and there isn't like a lot of blow up potential. It's actually an easier spot for me because I can just go mass swap, hit the swap, and there's nothing even to think about. There's there's nothing close. But I was winning a fair amount of head-to-heads at the time, and everything just didn't work out. But let's move on away from the specific player evaluation and from my late swap woes, and just talk about just kind of a what worked in DraftKings winning lineups. And you have some thoughts on this, but basically what worked was we had balanced builds. And then again, I want to go back to your point earlier, which I whiffed on and something that I should have noticed because I had evidence, a fair amount of wide receiver in the flex, especially on DraftKings, and then used it on FanDuel. So what were your thoughts just on the general builds that we saw that worked well over there?
Yeah, I mean, it was just so many stud wide receivers in concentrated offenses with high totals. In that situation, even on a day like that with FanDuel, you can have a wide receiver in the flex. Now, would it have been even better, I think, if I had found a way to get up to the very top? Because, it's getting to this point where Keenan Allen not scoring touchdowns, I'm almost starting to call it a thing. But I digress. Ultimately,
is Keenan the new Julio?
Never Keenan. No, I definitely think there are going to be better days. But you obviously are seeing a huge volume for the Chargers, but we haven't seen those 20 target games for Keenan Allen yet. I just think that ultimately when you have high total games with a bunch of strong wide receivers, Tennessee, Seattle had 4 obvious strong wide receiver plays as well, and Arizona, Minnesota had another 3. Okay, the amount of available wide receivers, the amount of possible wide receiver 1 games, we just know where they're concentrated to, and they're all in the afternoon. So this really presented itself as, how am I doing in the morning or in the early games? And then the pivots were all about ownership in the second part of the slate. Also, the fact that the top tier running backs, except for Derrick Henry, basically were unimportant for tournament winning lineups. Yeah. That's not always going to happen. Typically, we're going to have 1 or 2 really pop up performances. But in this case, when Derrick Henry goes for 50, and the rest of them are middling to unimportant. Kamara was troubling the amount of usage he had. Ultimately, it was just not a great day for running backs. So
yeah, I know I didn't touch on that Kamara play too much in my cash game. I'm not glossing over it. I'm going to get back to that when we get to some more of our couple zoomed out looks. Getting back to that wide receiver in the flex thing, especially on DraftKings, I only had 6 running backs in my player pool in my write up for the DraftKings cash game, and that was deliberate. I wasn't just going to force plays in there because I wanted to give the listeners or the readers a bigger player pool. There just weren't that many good plays. There was Mixon, Najee, and Carson. And then the big 3, or I mean, I didn't put Derrick Henry in there, but the pass catching back, CMC, Dalvin, and Kamara, I think going into any week in a vacuum are good plays. But the fact that it was hard to get to the expensive running backs, and probably most people weren't doing that in cash, and I liked Mixon, but didn't. Yeah. But the fact that there was really only 3 to 4 backs in my consideration should have been like, hey, look how many more wide receivers are. This might be one of those rare weeks where wide receiver in the flex makes sense. And if I would have taken the time to think about that, I probably accidentally fall into a better build, aka Cooper Kupp, because he fits like a third running back in the flex based on price. Let's kind of go somewhat rapid fire. What surprised you on the week, DFS or real football?
I think the biggest thing is that the Minnesota offense is less concentrated, particularly the passing game. KJ Osborne is like becoming a thing, killing our Immer Smith Marset dreams from earlier in the year.
Yeah.
Tough break for us. But ultimately, this was something that I found in my research heading into the season, where you saw a huge concentration of 60 to 70 fantasy points for the Vikings' top 3 options. If that's going to spread out to a 4th option, that's just one of those teams that we sort of have to look at as, that passing game is a little bit more difficult to figure out. Obviously, both Jefferson and Thielen score, but we're not seeing these mega performances yet. Yeah. And part of that is the target share that's headed Osborne's way. I think you might be able to see that concentration head towards the Tennessee Titans, though, where it's possible even that, similar to the Vikings last year, you could play 2 of these players and not play their quarterback. And I mean Henry or AJ Brown, or Henry and AJ Brown, or Henry and Julio, where they have a concentration of points over a 1-game sample that is really appetizing. And I'm kind of thinking that Bruce Arians and Tom Brady are trying to cook up a season for the ages over here, where they're at the 1-yard line multiple times and they're still calling Brady's number. I saw an incredible stat where I think he's 14 touchdowns away from having more touchdown passes in his 40s than his 20s.
Oh my!
So
that is
Tom Brady,
ridiculous.
that's just and the last thing I'll say is the Chiefs defense. I know this is from the night game. The Chiefs defense looks like a liability in terms of their Super Bowl contention. They're giving up a ton of points, but from a fantasy standpoint, this is something we just cannot overthink. When the Chiefs are on the main slate, we can tout all the different teams, all the different game environments, all the different game stacks. Please do not forget that when the Chiefs are on the main slate, the stack of Mahomes and Kelsey, or Mahomes and Hill, are the highest probability and highest ceiling stacks you can get.
Yeah, I will say what I obviously we saw touchdowns from not Tyreek and Kelsey last night. So I think we might finally see a evolution that we've kind of been hoping for, is like including a contrarian play, whether it be a Byron Pringle or a Mecole, even though Mecole didn't score last night. But just those ancillary players, I think we might be able to finally start getting them into Chief stacks. My takeaway is Carolina, they just might be good on both sides of the ball. They're kind of hitting with Joe Brady, and then their defense is, it looks like they're just going to be really damn good. I was kind of taking that game against the Jets with a grain of salt in week 1. Raiders offense, I mean, they're just throwing, and Derek Carr's checking their young players are really helping out with the deep ball. And Steelers, they might just be even if they squeak out some wins, they just might not have much fantasy goodness this year. I think they're going to have a lot of low scoring games. Let's quickly go. We're at the 30-minute mark. What are some things that you think you're going to change, or whether it be team level or just your DFS adjustments?
Just my process is going to continue to hone and reevaluating the players that we've overthought. This week it was definitely the big four running backs. When I get to that, was it 30,000-foot view, 1,000-foot view? I forget.
I don't know.
The bird's eye view.
Let's go.
Of the slate, trying to retake it in. I definitely want to make sure that when I see sort of strangely low roster percentages for these top running backs, that I take a step back and see if they're just the best play. Lean heavier on 2020 stats, and that will help us understand the 2021 variance to begin the season. And then I think I need to have a little less certainty about good defenses versus bad defense. We talk about bottom 10 defenses or top 10 offenses, and sometimes that's really closer to league average. The very bottom, we can sometimes talk about. Jacksonville has a very bad defense, but that's different than, say, Dallas's defense is, which is bad, but closer to average.
Yeah. I mean, I think anytime, if you're going to have, again, going back to the big four, if you're going to have one of the running backs 5%, one of the running backs 30%, you almost don't even have to look at matchup. Like, just that volume is that if they're 25 touch player, they're not the other one probably isn't 5 times as likely to have the big game. My biggest approach, and this goes back to the Kamara thing here. If I'm going to go with the stars and scrubs approach, which I tried to do this week, which is why you saw the O'Shaughnessy and the Cole Beasley with the Kamara, don't alligator arm it. Like, I could have went all the way down to like the Vikings and maybe get up to like closer to CMC, maybe like be able to jam a CMC in there instead of Kamara. And that's not even results based. That's like, if I'm going stars and scrubs, why am I going middling Steelers defense when I can get that money and get all the way up to CMC instead of Kamara? Just if you're going to go stars and scrubs, go with the guy that we know is. And sure, we had evidence that Kamara, he got 20 carries the week before, and that's kind of what I was thinking. But if you're going to go stars and scrubs, go all the way for it, which probably ended up being my biggest downfall of the week. And just like you said, we still have to lean on some 2020 data. I think we have like one more week of looking at things and saying that they might be noise, but we'll get into that more with some of our analysis when we get into week 3 analysis. Awesome show again. This is turning into one of my favorite 30 minutes of the week, just because it keeps us accountable, and this is fun. It's fun to review. Again, we'll start hitting up some guys. Hopefully we can get some user questions in here. We'll be talking to the 4for4 subscriber only Discord, continuation of these chats all the time. So make sure you're checking that out. Any last notes before we get out of here, Matt?
Yeah. Again, the lesson this week: don't overthink things.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And we'll be here all week to help you not overthink. We'll do all the thinking and help you not overthink. If you enjoy the show, please like us on YouTube. Follow the 4for4 channel on YouTube. Check out our other DFS shows at 4for4, the DFS MVP, myself and Matt, every Friday, 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern. That's streaming on YouTube. Also goes on all of your major podcast networks. Yahoo DFS show with Matt Harmon comes out every Saturday on the Yahoo podcast channel, as well as DFS MVP channel. GPP Last Look, Sunday morning, 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Subscriber-only Discord with Jordan Vanek. Follow us on Twitter. 4for4 is at 4for4 Football. Matt is at Draftaholic. I'm at TJ Hernandez. We'll talk to you guys on Friday.